I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
Protein is now at Starbucks, and it's never tasted so good. You can add protein cold foam to your favorite drink or try one of our new protein lattes or matcha. Try it today at Starbucks.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Since moving to Norway in late 2015, I've found myself missing the things I love about my home country of the United States in many ways. The warm, friendly people, both strangers and friends, the diversity of culture and food, and the best of the American spirit, the sense of adventure and openness and possibility, and how we embrace our freedoms with passion. But as I got further entrenched into Norwegian society, and with the benefits of both time and distance, I have slowly discovered that there were many things I have not missed about the USA. Things that changed my overall quality of life, stress level, and anxiety for the better. Let me preface this by saying that I love America. I am incredibly grateful to have been born there, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. America has given me every opportunity I've had to travel and to live a life that I love. The reason why I'm sharing this story I'm about to share and today's interview is because of my love for America and all of the people there. Because as the richest country in the world, I think we can do a whole hell of a lot better than we are doing. There's a lot going on right now. As you know, I'm not going to get into all that, but we're going to focus on one specific thing today, and that's the idea that we can actually gain more freedom by taking care of each other and taking better care of each other. I remember a moment here in Norway when things shifted for me. My wife was 5 months pregnant, and we were at the doctor's together. This was my first appointment with her because I was out of the country for 4 months because of my visa situation. Anyway, we saw the doctor, and then we started to leave, and I said, "Wait, honey, don't we have to pay for anything or check out or something?" No, she said, "Everything to do with the pregnancy is totally free. It's covered by our national health insurance scheme." Now, I knew this already. In fact, it's one of the main reasons we decided to settle in Norway, but actually being here and experiencing it and not having to worry about the medical bills and if my insurance would cover this and co-pays and blah, 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 that was just a huge load off of a soon-to-be parent. I can't explain to you how much of a difference it makes not having to pay for my own health insurance or worry if something happens that I'll lose everything. Not having to depend on some for-profit insurance company to pay for my bills, not having to beg them to do it. There are many other benefits here in Norway. For example, after the birth, my wife got nearly 1 year of paid leave to raise our little one. The pay was based on her previous work salary, and I found that living without the stress and anxiety around health insurance BS has given me more freedom than I felt in the land of opportunity. As a location-independent entrepreneur, I feel like I can take bigger risks and not have to worry about losing everything, including my health or the health of my family and everything we have. As a traveler, I'm still free to roam. And as a new parent, I don't have to worry about the basic needs of my family being taken care of. So I don't have to compromise my travel goals because I, for example, need to keep a job or work insane hours just to keep my health insurance. And I know there are a lot of people out there that are in this situation. And living in a country that works to make sure the tax dollars you pay give you something back in terms of healthcare is liberating. And American individuals, family, friends, neighbors take care of each other. They are some of the most amazing and friendly people in the world. I know this through personal experience, having road tripped nonstop around the U.S. for over 10 years. And everywhere I go, everywhere I travel around the world, people always tell me how friendly Americans are, how kind they are. And we help each other out as individuals, but for some reason that baffles me, there are so many people that are against this idea of helping each other out on a big scale through universal healthcare. And I can't imagine why anybody would, for example, want a kid with cancer from a poor family not to get treatment just because he or she can't afford it or their family can't afford it. I don't know. There are a lot of issues, a lot of things going on right now in America. This is not a political podcast, so I'm not going to get into all that, even though it's hard not to, because it affects all of us as travelers and as individuals and as world citizens. I think that's another thing that unites this community outside of the love for travel. When you roam around this planet and you experience different cultures and different places, you realize although the world is big, it is very small. We are all connected, and everything we do has an impact on each other. And as world citizens, I know this community represents those core values, human rights and tolerance and compassion and all of the things that every individual deserves. Anyway, I bring this up and I share this story because today's interview was compelling in many ways, particularly for me and my personal situation as an American living in Scandinavia, experiencing the Scandinavian system here in Norway when it comes to healthcare and education and all of the social benefits that come with living here. And my guest is a well-known author who wrote a book about the flip side of that. She's a Scandinavian living in America and giving her interpretation of Americans and what it's like coming from here and going over there and experiencing the culture there and how things work, and making an argument of sorts for Americans to model some of these social benefits that Scandinavians receive, and that's part of the society here. It was just a fascinating discussion. I loved her book, and I don't want to delay any further. I'm excited to share it with you, so please enjoy today's interview, and I will see you on the other side, my friend. My guest today is the author of a book that I highly recommend. It's called The Nordic Theory of Everything, In Search of a Better Life. It's written by a Finnish journalist who, after moving to America in 2008, began to notice how much more complicated and stressful things seem to be in the States compared to back home in her country of Finland. So she wrote this book to open Americans' eyes to how much better things can be and to show how the Nordic way of doing things can generate more freedom for individuals to fulfill their desires in life, more travel, more health, more education, and more overall opportunities. I am thrilled to have her here to share her perspectives and ideas. Anu Partanen, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. And your book has come at, shall we say, an interesting time given the state of the United States after the election. But I want to get a little more background about your time in the States and how this book evolved. How did you end up going to America in the first place?
Oh, for the very typical reason of love. I was living in Finland and I was working as a journalist, and I was actually pretty happy with my life. I wasn't really looking to move abroad or leave anywhere. I love travel, and I had studied in France and I had studied in Australia, and so I had spent some periods of time abroad and away from Finland. But overall, I was pretty happy here. But then I went to a work-related conference in the United States, and I met an American man. And after 2 years of long-distance dating, we decided that I will move to the United States.
That's funny because we have a lot in common in that way, because I was based in the States and I was very happy with where I was, but started dating long distance. My wife here in Norway, who's now my wife, I sort of did the reverse thing, I guess, which makes this conversation interesting because I think it adds another layer, because I'm coming from the American perspective here in a Nordic country and you've gone in reverse.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And we really too, with my also now husband, we did think about it. What would be the best thing? And maybe he would move to Finland, and he would have been prepared to do that. For us, it kind of came down to the fact that we're both journalists and we work with language. I already spoke English. He didn't speak Finnish. So at the time, we just thought that, well, maybe it makes sense for at least for me first to move to the US. But it's still possible that we'll move to Finland at some point.
Yeah, it sounds like that's an open dialogue between you two. Yeah,
it is, definitely.
It's a hard decision. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on, international couples and everything like that. That's not what this podcast is about. It can be difficult, and there are a lot of things to weigh. And I'm curious just about the book. Did it come more out of your love for America and wanting to make the country better after you'd spent time there? Or did it come more out of your love and pride for Finland and how you do things there?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think it was both. I have to say, I'm sure many people who move to another country experience this, that when you start learning what life is like somewhere else, you also start seeing the country that you came from differently. And so for me, it was definitely those two things. I moved to the United States. I was somewhat baffled by how everything works there, and I was thinking about it a lot and the differences between the countries. And in the end, I really wanted to write the book because I wanted to participate in the American discussion, in the discussion that I was living in that country, and I felt like I had something to contribute. So in a sense, that was the love for America and thinking that maybe I can, be part of thinking about where the United States wants to go and how we could make life a little bit easier for everyone. Because the main thing I found was that life there seemed so much more complicated and difficult than what I was used to. And it seemed somewhat unnecessary. That why does it have to be this complicated when other countries have some solutions that might work? But at the same time, there was the other side where I really started to see Finland differently. And I don't know if you or any of the listeners know Finnish people, but they have the lowest self-esteem in the world. I think both as individuals, but also as a collective nation. So I think Finns still have this identity that Finland is a poor, small country. It used to be part of Sweden, and then it was part of Russia. And so it has always, I think people have this sense that we're always this kind of a backwater. And so I don't think Finns often realize what to me seemed after moving to America was that these are amazing accomplishments, actually, as a society. That it is a poor country. It doesn't have oil, unlike Norway, and it doesn't have a history as a sort of a big kingdom like Sweden or Denmark. And yet it has managed to sort of catch up and become a wealthy country that works well in very challenging circumstances in terms of weather or winter or whatnot. So then I really felt like, wow, I think I had never really appreciated all the work Finland had done.
It's something you talk about in the book. I know it's a very nuanced psychological thing as well, but you're talking about the pride of the Finnish people essentially and saying the low self-esteem, but also that's typical of the Nordic region, right? It's kind of what you talk about is how you don't really, it's kind of taught to you that you shouldn't really stand out too much and draw too much attention to yourself. I've been trying to get my head around this as somebody living in Norway, and I've heard this from other people, other Norwegians that I've discussed this with as well. Can you explain a little bit what it's like to grow up in that culture and why is that?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think it's changing a lot. So I definitely think that it is true, as it's almost a cliche, and everybody who knows Nordic countries knows this or thinks that this is true, that in Nordic countries, you're not really supposed to stand out. Everybody's equal. If you try to talk about your own achievements, people can easily think that you're being narcissistic or self-centered or whatnot. And of course, the difference to the United States is huge because in America, people are sort of interested and happy to talk about everyone's achievements and celebrate them and all that. And I think in this, certainly, Finns could learn a lot from the United States. But I also think that it has changed when I now look at 20-something Finns. I really don't think it's actually true anymore so much that they can't, shine as who they are or they don't appreciate. So I think that's a good thing, definitely. And in the book, I talk a lot about independence and how certain ways of arranging society can support your independence in relation to other people. And I think Nordic people do this very well. But then what I definitely, I think it's a different thing to support people's eccentricity and to so these are two different things, I think. And I think Finns certainly, and probably all Nordics, could learn a little bit from countries like the UK or Britain, where it's more appreciated if people are very different and stand out. That's like a good thing in those countries.
Yeah, I find having spent time in Norway, I don't know, sort of thinking that was not good for society to have that sort of undercurrent of everybody should be the same. But then after you're somewhere for a while, like, as you know, you spend time in America and you start to see value in certain American things. And then you also see value in maybe things back home that you didn't notice before. And then I feel like you got this balance now we're talking about where it's like, okay, celebrating people's accomplishments, their eccentricities, if you will, but also recognizing that everybody is equal and should have an equal opportunity. I think that's one of the things that you're really saying in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are really interesting questions because, of course, it's not very clear cut. I think actually what's been interesting after the book has come out in the United States, so I talk about this dilemma. There's one chapter where I basically discuss these differences in sort of mental state of mind, whether people are negative or optimistic, and whether they celebrate somebody being special or not. And I think in the United States, in some ways, it has gone maybe a little bit too far because there's this expectation partly that everybody should be very special and accomplish amazing things. And not everybody can. I mean, it's just realistic. Most people are fairly average, and that's good. And it's been interesting to me that when I've talked about this in the book and then afterwards given talks, Americans have often actually commented to me that they found that chapter was great because they feel like the whole focus on being so special in the United States is actually, it creates a lot of pressure, and you always feel like a failure if you didn't manage to be the one who somehow you're
comparing yourself to you're playing basketball out back, but you want to be Michael Jordan.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So it's a good thing to aspire to be, the best possible person you can be or have, or use your talents. But at the same time, it can go a little bit too far if you have to feel bad if you can't be, the best in the world in something.
When we grow up in a culture, like I grew up in the States, you kind of just assume, hey, this is just the way things are and this is how it goes. You don't really know. You're a bit blinded, right? Yet, from an outsider's perspective, you came in and you're bringing all these fresh perspectives and saying, okay, I'm really noticing something here in modern day American society. And people are really freaking stressed out, seems to be kind of like the conclusion. I'm just wondering, what were some of the aspects of your daily life that changed just by the simple fact that you were living in the States? Like, what was good and what was bad? And how did it affect you emotionally and physically?
Yeah, so that's a huge thing. And I think it's interesting that today we have this sort of globalized world and we're all online and we have discussions with people from other countries. So you kind of get the feeling like you know what life is like in other countries. And then you move to another country and all of a sudden you realize that it's so different because all countries have organized their affairs differently and they have a little bit of different values or different assumptions. All countries have these sort of common truths that everybody knows that this is the way it is. And then you come from another country and you're like, well, in my country, nobody thinks that that's the way it is. So it's really interesting, but it's also very practical. So for me, when I first moved to the US, I found just arranging what I had always considered to be very basics of daily life, just getting a cell phone or, signing up for healthcare or knowing where to go to the doctor. I don't have children, but when I looked at I got to know people, I'm, of the age where my friends have kids. And the way they talked about schools all the time, every time there were people who would get together and they would have small children, they'd discuss which school does your child go to and do you know this school or that school or how are the exams and can I get in? And do you know anyone that I could connect with so that our child could get into this school? All this was completely new to me. These kinds of discussions don't really exist at all as much in Finland. Some of it, of course, but not much. And so partly things that I had to deal with, like healthcare, really were making me feel really stressed out. And at first I thought that it's just me. You know, you move to another country, you don't understand how anything works. You're kind of stuck with your mindset from the other country that you used to live in. So it's understandable that you feel a little bit lost. But what was really a sort of moment when I thought that, wow, I guess there is something for me to write about here, was when I realized that everybody else was stressed out too. All the Americans who lived in that society as well, they found it difficult to arrange these same things that I found difficult. So it wasn't just because I didn't know or I hadn't done it before. It was for everyone incredibly complicated. And in Nordic countries, some of these things were much simpler. I mean, because you have universal healthcare system, you don't have to think about it really unless you get sick.
I mean, was it very noticeable to you that there was an undercurrent of anxiety and stress that was much more prevalent than it was back in Finland?
Definitely, I think so. Yeah, overall, it seemed to me that it was when I met friends and people, just chatting with them, there was so much talk about, you know, all kinds of troubles that people were having. I could see it, of course, the way people work. Americans work a lot longer hours all the time, and they don't have as much vacation time. And when I started to think about my friends back home who also have kids and were sort of in a similar life situation with similar education level, a little bit similar jobs, and my Nordic friends just seemed so much more relaxed. I mean, everybody, of course, has stressful schedules and lives, but, you know, they would have their vacation. And speaking of travel, they would, all of a sudden, it started to seem to me when I looked at Facebook or I spoke to my friends that everyone I know in Finland is constantly traveling somewhere. And nobody I knew in New York City, of course, New York is an international place to begin with, but they didn't have vacation or money or time. It was like a big deal if you can go to Europe or somewhere. So I thought that was actually really noticeable. And then, of course, as a society, just reading the newspapers, the public debates, the discussions. And then another sort of aspect of this that is on the other side was the whole self-help industry. There were so many articles and books and things that tried to tell people how to manage this or that, or meditation, which in itself is a good thing. But it often seemed to me that I don't think Nordic people need that much to go and meditate because they're not so anxious all the time that they have to cure it by meditation.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
This episode is brought to you by Fandango. People say fans are too distracted these days, but the truth is, when a great movie hits the screen, you show up, you stay glued, invested, part of the story. And without fans like you, there'd be no cinema magic, no shared moments. So head to Fandango.com to get tickets, stream, or rent or buy top movies and series. Fandango loves fans.
Now, back to the show.
One of the lines you had, something, I don't know if this is a direct quote, but you said Americans can't afford to relax, basically, because there's a lot of, so many things you got to take care of, so many extra things you have to pay for, whereas the system takes care of that in the Nordic countries. And I think anybody who travels outside of their country, you know, you get an open mind, you start to see how other countries do things better, and you're like, I wish I could take some of this stuff home and like cherry pick it and have this work here and this work here. And I know a lot of this is tied in with your book, but I've noticed Americans in general, and I'm generalizing big time here, have this sort of delusion that America's the greatest country in the world. It leads in everything. They're the ultimate example of freedom. There's nothing to learn from anybody else. And I think the problem is when politicians or prominent figures bring up ideas like Nordic healthcare, for example, and taking that system, they risk being branded as socialist or dangerous or un-American. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that's partly because the world has changed. And I think for all of us, it takes a little while to catch up. Like that our ideas of how the world is or how our country is or what its place in the world is, it takes a while for us to realize where we are. And this also was interesting to me when I was working on the book, because I thought that Finnish people's self-esteem or view of Finland has not caught up with the fact that Finland is actually one of the wealthiest countries in the world today. If you look at it in terms of income per capita or the wealth of the country, I mean, it doesn't have huge oil wealth or anything, but still. And I think Finns still see themselves as a poor country. It's hard for them to understand that actually that's not really true anymore. And for the United States, I think for a long time, it's true that the US led the world in everything. American middle class was always the wealthiest, and there was more opportunity and more education. So for a long time, it was sort of true that the United States was actually, in a sense, greatest country in the world with most freedom. And maybe everybody hasn't kind of realized. I think now actually what we've seen in this election with the anger and the anxiety and people really voting for change, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, it seems to me that Americans actually have kind of realized that, oops, maybe things are not working as well as they should be here anymore. But then the socialism question is also interesting because to me, definitely, I was surprised when I moved to the US and realized that they do think that Nordic countries are socialist, and that's bad because, of course, in the Nordic countries, we don't really think of ourselves in those terms, or at least that our system is somehow bad. And that's one of the things I really wanted to do with the book, wanted to discuss the way Nordic countries arrange their societies. And I wanted to discuss them in terms of freedom and independence and equality of opportunity and also economy. The fact that a lot of international organizations that are interested in growth and economy and all the, like, not hippie stuff. And they think that these are actually good solutions or policies. And I think that doesn't really come up in American conversation, which is why I wasn't so happy with Bernie Sanders labeling himself a socialist. I mean, it seemed to work and people kind of liked it in America. And a lot of young people like proudly declared themselves socialist. But to me, it was like, well, this is kind of reinforcing the idea that we're in the Soviet Union era and socialism is still somehow irrelevant discussion to either support or to oppose. And it just seemed old-fashioned to me.
Yeah, he's more talking about socialism, like setting up social structure to support people, not like an extreme form of socialism or whatever. Yeah. You mentioned the recent American election. I mean, how could we not have it in this conversation? A lot of it was driven by hate and isolationism, and you offer a Nordic theory of love, which I think we need more of right now. We need some more love, right? So
we do.
Can you explain your Nordic theory of love?
Yeah, so this was one of the things when I moved to the US, and I was looking around and I was wondering why things are the way they are. And so one of the things I was observing was just people's relationships. So children and their parents and wives and husbands or people in a relationship. And to me, it sort of looked like, well, somehow American people seemed less independent in their relationships than in the Nordic countries. And pretty quickly I realized that, well, why this is or why I was feeling like this was because in the US, so much of the practicalities of life are run by the family in a sense. So if a child wants to go to a university, then parents would probably have to pay, or that's the idea, that parents have saved for college education and they pay for it. Or when parents get elderly, it's expected that the children take over a lot of the coordinating care and taking care and maybe even paying for some of it. And for couples, if one of you wants to stay on parental leave, and if your employer doesn't offer parental leave, so then it turns out that only one of you works and brings home the pay and the other one takes care of children. So in many ways, it seemed to me that American society kind of, in a way, forces people into this fairly, what to me were old-fashioned relationships in which in family there's this sort of division of labor that that might force some to sacrifice something for the other, or some people in the family have to be grateful to the other ones. And it all made it seem like people were less independent. And this was, of course, a little bit surprising for me to observe, because I was thinking, well, Americans are supposed to be like the freest of all. And, I had always seen you watch American movies and everybody's always packing their moving U-Haul trucks and they're like moving to another city and starting a new life from zero. But that's not really what I was seeing. It seemed that people's fate, American children's fate, was really tied to how much their family can help them or support them or do. And this, of course, seemed also the opposite of the American dream or the idea of equality of opportunity, that no matter what your background, you can make it on your own merits. And so I was thinking about this, but then when it really, to come to the Nordic theory of love, I ran into the Swedish academic, Lars Tregård, who used to live in the United States for 30 years and now is back in Sweden. And he and a collaborator had written a book in Sweden, only in Swedish, unfortunately, so far, where they discussed similar questions in a more sort of academic manner than I do. And they had developed something they called the Swedish theory of love. And their point was that we always think that Nordic countries are these collectivist societies where everybody kind of sacrifices their individualism for the common good. And they were basically saying, no, it's the opposite. In fact, in Nordic countries, there's a strong sort of tradition and support for everybody's independence. And this also means independence in the family, because true love is not possible if people in that relationship are not independent and equal. So you have to be independent financially. Your future cannot depend on that one person that you're in a relationship with. If it does, then you can't be honest with your feelings, and the relationship is burdened. And so their take on it was that, in fact, all the Nordic social policies, a lot of what they do is they give everybody this independence, that you can be on parental leave and still be paid. So you're not dependent on the other person's money, or you can go to university and you don't have to pay, and it doesn't matter if your parents can pay. And all this sort of supports your ability to approach your life and be in relationships with people from a position of independence.
It does sound counterintuitive in some ways, right?
In some ways, yes. And I know that Americans often, when, I talk about this, I think the American fear often is that, well, but this breaks families apart. Like, this is like the Soviet Union where the government is your husband. This is actually something that I think Ann Coulter said once when somebody was suggesting that we need, better support for parental leaves or something. And so I think the American idea is very much that it's a good thing that families are sort of tied together with all kinds of both financial and emotional ties, because that's what families do. And I think, of course, in Nordic countries, everybody loves family. I mean, this Nordic theory of love doesn't mean that, we don't want to
not take care of our parents, for example.
Of course. Yeah. People take care of their parents, and they still do. It just means that everybody should have the basics of life that they need to shape their own fate, and not be dependent on goodwill of somebody close to them, or just who happens to be, if they're born into a family, that would decide everything. But people still love their families. And then if you look at all studies that compare well-being of children in different countries or families, Nordic countries actually do very well, which sort of shows that this approach can actually make families stronger when people don't have to be so tied into these all kinds of a little bit problematic relationships and burdens and
Yeah, I mean, essentially you're saying that the system as it is in the States right now is creating a series of codependent relationships for individuals amongst their spouses, their family, even their children when it comes to the education, everything like that. So it's all sort of one big messy situation. Like you mentioned, paradoxically, you're saying a bigger government, I'm using that in air quotes, and I'll use a quote from your book, actually. You say, Americans are right that big government isn't the best way to solve problems. The secret of Nordic success is not big government, it's smart government.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to really think about what the purpose of government is. And in the United States, often people think that there is no purpose, or that's the ideal, that it's best that there is no government and everybody takes care of their own things. But a lot of things, for example, healthcare or university education, they're very complicated, they're very expensive. And I definitely would argue that the way Nordic people arrange it, it saves everyone time, it saves everyone money, and it supports these very basic, very actually American values of opportunity for everyone, regardless of your background.
You know, Americans, I think, inherently have a mistrust of big government. We have this feeling that they're just going to screw it up. So how do you get people to trust the government again? You know, just...
Yeah, that's a really difficult question, of course, because it is completely true. You look at American government, I mean, I'm not surprised that nobody trusts them. To a Nordic, one of the shocking things of arriving to the United States is to realize how poorly many government services work. And even, again, sort of counterintuitively, Americans often, of course, think that Nordic taxes are so high that that's alone a reason to hate, or not consider Nordic model. I think overall they're not as high as Americans often think, but certainly overall Nordics collect more taxes than the United States does. But it's shocking how difficult it is to deal with with IRS, the American tax office, compared to Finnish. And so a lot of these services that in Nordic countries the government provides, and I think work pretty well. They're designed okay. It's easy to handle for the individual. It's easy to deal with them. And in the United States, it's so complicated and you always have to wait and nothing works and a lot of bureaucracy. So I understand that Americans feel like, well, government can do nothing right. And then you look at Washington, D.C. and how it's always in some sort of political gridlock. It's not good. But I think my take on that, if you think about it in practical terms, what could be done, things could be done in the States, more local level, and a lot of things are done. And I think Americans overall seem more open to that. And maybe it's smart in the US if you want to change things that you think that, well, maybe we can start at the state level or even city level. Like big cities in the United States, of course, are doing a lot of things on their own, like San Francisco or New York.
Yeah. And I mean, just through my short time here, I mean, as of time of this recording, I've been here almost a year. But since then, I mean, I've had my healthcare covered and my wife has gone through a pregnancy and had our child. And, you know, it was crazy to me that we could just like go into a doctor and then walk out. And now she's been home on pay, which is based on the last job that she did. It's based on her salary, what she earned before. And all of this would not be possible in the States. And I can definitely say that I would be way more stressed out right now if I had all of these lingering things, because everybody just wants to take care of their family. And I feel like here you feel like you're getting something for your tax dollars, at least.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, you can hear me struggling because I'm not saying rah, like go Norway and everything in America sucks. I'm just sharing my experience. And you know, like you with the book, I mean, that's one of the big reasons I wanted to bring you on, is because it's for the love of America. You know, we want to let people know, hey, there are these options, and maybe they don't seem as dangerous as they do on the surface. And that's one of the things that you've done tremendously in this book, is just to go into the arguments as to why this is a good way of doing things. And one of the codependent relationships we didn't really talk about I find fascinating is why a lot of people think that a for-profit like company system, say health insurance, for example, why they assume that for-profit companies are going to make decisions based on their interests. That seems like insane to me.
Yeah, the healthcare is a really interesting question, because I think everybody in America pretty much agrees that it's a mess. Nobody is really happy with the system there is right now, and it's very complicated and expensive. America spends by vast amounts more on healthcare than any other country in the world. And then if you look at the quality of care, according to studies, it's not necessarily that much better. It can even be worse. So, but most of the time, I think the one driving question that drives it, Americans always want to choose their own doctor. And that often is the first thing they think about, and they think that if the government arranges things, then you cannot choose. And if private companies arrange it, then you can choose. And I think it's very important that people can choose their doctor. It's a really important relationship. Of course you want it to be somebody that you feel that they listen to you and they're competent. But the irony is that right now, if you look at the way American system works, I mean, most people don't have a lot of choice. Their employer chooses the health insurance plan, so you don't really have a choice of saying which you can choose maybe between few plans, but there's less choices than there used to be. And then the insurance plan has networks of doctors, and then you have to choose from those doctors. And so it's actually very limited. And exactly as you're saying, I guess there's this idea that this is a rational system and private companies by, invisible hand will lead them to work to best interests of the customer. And that's the idea. But in reality, healthcare is so complicated that ordinary person just doesn't stand a chance in fighting against private companies that run insurance plans or hospitals or whatnot. It's not an equal balanced relationship where you can really negotiate. So I can see why people think that the competition will mean that the patient, aka customer, will be able to choose and it'll be in my best interests. But in practice, it just doesn't work that way. In a service like this, it's different from buying jeans. Sure, if you're buying jeans, you can that's a good thing for you. But in healthcare, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, that was funny because you said customer, aka patient or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that kind of gets lumped together, but although that may be the same individual, that's two totally different scenarios. We're talking about people's health, caring. I mean, what do we have besides like our lives? If we don't have our health, I mean, this is what we have here on earth. And once that goes, we're gone. So it's just crazy to me to think that there are people there that do think for-profit system is the right way to go. I just cannot get my head around that.
Yeah, and it's curious. I mean, I can understand the idea behind it, but if they look at the American system where it is now, and actually, do they think it's working now? I'm not sure. Maybe then they think that it's not working, probably because there's Obamacare or something meddling. But there's a long history of Americans now trusting their healthcare to for-profit insurance companies, for-profit hospitals, and it's not working well for most people.
Their job is to make money and take care of you. This is probably secondary in a lot of cases. I mean, I know maybe that's a charged statement, but you have to look at the big picture, and overall companies like of a certain size will make a decision based on what their profit margin is going to be. And so it's interesting. I'm not sure if in Norway there's discussion, but I feel like in a lot of countries, this freedom to choose has become a big theme. And in Sweden, for example, in education as well, there's schools that are sort of called the free school, where people want to be able to choose. And as a principle, it's a good principle, but you just have to be very careful to figure out how to implement it. And again, private companies in an area like education too, it can be problematic because their interests are a little bit different from maybe their customers, aka students' interests.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show.
And I mean, going back to your point on the Nordic theory of love and having more individualism, more freedom, more independence, and that includes travel, I can speak from experience that having the insurance covered is just such a weight off your shoulders that it takes a lot of stress out of your everyday life. And I mean, think about how much of a difference that makes collectively as a society. If everybody just knows on the most basic level that, their tax dollars are going towards taking care of their family and that they will be taken care of, at least their health will be, what a huge weight off of people. That changes the entire dynamic of a society. I don't know how we get there in America, but I would like to see what America would be like under that system. I would like to see how it would change as a society.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about with the book too, because I think the American idea has for a long time been that we need to help the poorest. Most people agree that there has to be some sort of safety net. But then there's this idea that there's no point, or it's not a good thing to provide services for people who have okay jobs, that they have to arrange it for themselves. But I think the problem with that is that then a lot of people start feeling like, well, I don't get anything out of this deal and I'm just paying for these other people. Whereas in Nordic countries, if you have a service that's for everyone, healthcare, everybody feels like they benefit, they get out of this. My tax dollars are going for me. That's also one of the things I often talk about with Americans, that the idea of the Nordic model is not that I'm paying these taxes because I want to be a good person and pay for my neighbor. I mean, that's part of it. I want to live in a society where everybody has healthcare, but I'm paying for my own healthcare. And then that, of course, like you're saying, means that I know that my tax dollars are going to where it's taking care of my family, and then I'm happier to pay for it. But in terms of just the brain power, it really, it lets you use your time and energy and thinking for other things and not be constantly worried. I mean, it's huge. I think it could be huge for a society for sure, how different and how much Americans have to. And like you're saying, when you have a child, I was just talking to a friend who had a baby here in Finland, and then he has a friend in the United States, and they had been pregnant at the same time. And this friend in Finland said that it was just striking that for him, having a child in Finland, he could spend his time kind of wrapping his head around this thing that a new person is coming and what does this mean? But his American friend was wrapping her head around, how am I going to pay for this? What is my health insurance covering? Who's my doctor? Where I'm going to give birth? How much is it going to cost? What about daycare? What about parental leave? So all of a sudden you have to just think about these frantically important but very practical questions, whereas in a Nordic country, at least, you kind of have the freedom to try to contemplate the actual emotional change and all that.
Yeah. I mean, and what's more important really than raising a child that's, gets an education and making them into a good human being as part of society. And I mean, as it relates to education, I wanted to read one quote from your book. You said, imagine then what it's like to be a Nordic parent. You can simply focus on raising a human being in an age-appropriate way at every stage without ever once feeling guilty that you're not saving enough money or not making enough money to secure them the college education they'll need to avoid ending up in the gutter. And you say that because college and university is free in the Nordic countries. And I mean, talk about a little bit about education and how that changes the dynamic for the society and for parents. I mean, like you already kind of talked about how it does for parents, but for the society, because I think if everybody has access to higher levels of education, I mean, over time, that's going to create a better society. So, I mean, I think one of the big problems in America right now is the educational system. I have a question about that in a minute, but I'm curious about your thoughts on free education, how it works in the Nordic countries, and how you think that would benefit the States.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, of course, it's key to equality of opportunity, for giving every person the opportunity to get the tools they need to then employ themselves later in life or to apply themselves and use their talents. I mean, it's important only for that, if not for anything else. But then it's really important, of course, also if we look at where are we going in the world and which way are we headed, well, people will need more and more education to be able to find jobs. And so for a society, absolutely investing in everybody's education so you have people who are able to do the jobs that are available. I mean, that's just a sensible economic policy as well. But then I think it does affect the society as a whole and democracy. If people are well educated, if they feel like they have the tools they need to understand society and so on, I think they can make better decisions just in terms of voting or in their own life. And I think sometimes in the United States, compared to the Nordic countries, you can see this as well. Like, for example, the government services that we talk about. I think in Nordic countries, mostly everybody has a fairly good education, regardless, even if they haven't gone to actually university or gotten a master's degree. But so I think it leads to also this sort of professionalism in work, that then things work and people do their job. And so I think in the United States, there has been more of a thinking that a lot of jobs are like, you don't really need training. And then you go to a store or a government office, and it seems like even the employees don't really know what they're supposed to be doing and how anything works. And I think that's partly related to the fact that everybody doesn't have the same opportunity to get a good education. So then even just your daily life and routines of society work better if everybody has the chance to be well educated, even if everybody's not like academics or anything.
Yeah. One of the questions you talked about as it relates to education is, should children be educated to fill the roles that society needs, or should they be educated to reach their fullest potential as a human being? How does it work in the Nordic countries? I know I agree with the latter.
I think all countries debate this all the time. For example, in Finland, certainly Finland has been very engineer-oriented society. Nokia, the cell phone company, used to be Finland's biggest company for a long time. And every now and then there's been discussion. Some industry leaders come out saying that we need children educated more with math and physics because that's what they need when they get a job. I think it's sensible to think about that, of course, that what do we need? But if you think about basic education in Nordic countries compared to American schools, for example, in public education, Nordic countries, certainly in Finland, which I know best, of course, very much emphasizes that there's arts and there's crafts and there's cooking. Like all children, they have a kitchen in the school, and it's part of the curricula that all children have to learn how to cook. And I think that's fantastic, and it's sensible, and it helps kids learn other things than just studying books and math and all that. In the US lately, partly because of cuts, that public schools just don't have enough money, but also because there's been such a strong focus that we have to just teach them to the test, certain exams that have to be taken, and schools' fate is dependent on that. And then also to the needs of what kind of job we might offer them. Some schools have just dropped basically arts completely, or gym, PE, none of it anymore in the school. And I mean, that's, I think, bad for students' health, but it's also bad just for raising human beings who have multiple skills and can use different talents and can handle life. And it's, of course, also kind of exercise for your brain, too. Different types of things, even if we think that, oh, well, children are, baking pastries in school. That's what Finnish children actually do in school, and everybody loves it. But that's important, too. I mean, it's different type of, you learn different things, and you think about your food differently, and it's a good thing, I think, to give an overall education. And I think Nordic countries think about this more than the United States does. You can see this in early education as well, in daycare. In Nordic daycare centers, there's a strong emphasis that children should play and they should be outside a lot, and you shouldn't start teaching to young children, like children younger than 6 years old, too much to read or do math. And in the US, a lot of the discussion around early childhood education is that children should be taught to read earlier and earlier and so on.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure on kids. It always blows my mind when I think about what we didn't learn in school. I mean, I went to school a while ago now, but, so sure things have changed. But, I'm really shocked that there wasn't a course on, personal finance, for example. You're just like, okay, here's what credit cards are. Here's what they can do to you if you use it wrong. All of these things that are actually the things that can help you get ahead in life, that are part of daily life. I'm always surprised by the lack of education around those particular things in the States. The flip side of everything we've been talking about, Anu, is all of the great stuff that comes out of the States and the amazing people there, how friendly they are, how open they are. They're some of the friendliest people in the world, and all of the art and culture and everything that comes out. And one could argue that, these things exist it's all intertwined. Everything's connected, right? So there's good stuff coming out of the States as well. And, that might be even a reason that people are like, okay, we like the culture here. We want it to stay this way, not necessarily, the income inequality, for example. But what do you think about, I guess, the flip side of that?
Yeah, I think there are so many things I love about the US. And that's, I really wanted to, when I was working on the book, I really thought about it as, we're in this together. I mean, I'm here with you. I've lived in the US now for 8 years, and I'm an American citizen. And so I love it, exactly the kinds of things you were saying, that Americans are so friendly and so helpful. And for a Nordic person, when you move to the United States, it takes a little while to get used to all the small talk and all the, chatting with someone on the bus. Nordics don't do that. But once I got used
why don't they do that? It drives me crazy.
Yeah,
I want to chat people up while I'm around here because I'm a chatty guy, because I'm American, I guess, and I like to talk, but especially after a couple cups of coffee, that's not the vibe here.
It's just somehow exhausting. It's just, I think, matter of getting used to it or habit. I used to find it genuinely kind of exhausting. It was like, if I'm sitting on the bus, I just want to look out the window and think about my own thoughts. And it seemed like it was, work for me to start discussing with someone that I don't know and try to think about something to say. Now that I've been in the US, it doesn't seem like work to me anymore. It's nice. We have a friendly conversation. Sometimes I learn something interesting about somebody else's life, and I really enjoy it. And it didn't take me that long to sort of change my mind, but it's just a cultural difference. I definitely think Nordic should be more open and chat more. It would be a good thing. But so all these things are fantastic. And of course, you look at the United States, like you were saying, all the fantastic TV shows or all this fantastic technology, all these things that people everywhere in the world use. And so I guess the question here then is like, well, okay, so if we have paid parental leave or if we have healthcare for everyone, does it mean that Americans will stop chatting with each other? Does it mean that there will be no more, Steve Jobs is coming out of the United States? I don't think those two are connected. In fact, the United States used to have much better benefits and sort of better system, for example, in public education before, and it has supported the industry. So of course you have to think about taxation and everything being optimal so people have incentives to create. But I think the big strength that the United States really has is that it has had so much immigration, that it has all these points of views and all this sort of dynamic life. If you look at places like Silicon Valley that people usually admire the most about the United States in terms of business, I mean, a lot of people from everywhere in the world come and work for those companies, and that's a great strength. And I think Nordic countries could certainly learn from that, to see that as strength. But I don't really think that these sort of basic social policies that help everyone, have daycare for their child, I don't think those are going to change the American.
It's not going to ruin the art and the culture coming out of America.
It's not. And that's one of the things I also wanted to talk about in the book, that these are actually all policies that, support people's ability to work and support the economy as well.
Well, I'm bringing it up and we're joking around a little bit about the chattiness and everything. But I mean, I think the big point is that I think Americans' biggest fear is that, hey, this is an intrusion. This is going to change our daily life. And this is the American way. And we don't want to mess with, how we live our lives. And a lot of the ideas you present in this book aren't going to affect that, I don't believe. I mean, I think, like we're saying, we're on the same page where it's only going to make it better. It's not a threat to the American way of life, basically.
Yeah, I think
it's perceived as that. I mean, it's a big gap to jump.
It is. And of course, everybody, I think in all countries, people tend to be afraid of change. It's just probably human nature that we're worried. And everybody's worried always, like, if there is this change, am I going to be losing something because of this change? And of course, it's understandable fear. But I also think that these could be things that could actually help everyone and not make people lose things. But so in terms of, because they are big changes, I think what's great and promising is that cities like New York, for example, is starting its own parental leave policy, paid parental leave fund. So all employees are going to pay into it. And then when you're on your unpaid leave, then you're going to get paid. So I think you can start like programs, you don't have to all of a sudden change everything, but you can start with small programs to see how that works. And then it could spread so that it's not so drastic and dramatic. But of course, you're right. It's a big psychological step to think that, but is this going to be a country I don't recognize anymore?
It's a massive psychological shift. And, one thing is to change policy, but another thing is to change an entire society's psyche in a way.
Yeah. And what's interesting, though, I also just quickly want to say, because Americans often think that, well, it's never been the American way to trust the government or to have these things, so it's not American. But actually, there's, for example, this interesting book called American Amnesia that is written by two American professors, where they look back and say that actually up until Nixon, basically Americans actually believed that government should be used to help people and provide services. And there were basic income experiments done under Nixon's presidency. So it's not that long ago that Americans actually did believe that this would be the way go. And of course, there was the war on poverty and the New Deal and all these programs were created. So it's actually a fairly recent development that this whole idea has come to be, that there is nothing that government can do, and it's anti-American to think that they can help.
If you're interested in what we're talking about today, the Nordic Theory of Everything, In Search of a Better Life, you got to pick it up. You got to pick it up. She covers everything. It's an awesome book, extremely well written, and yeah, I couldn't put it down. It was really great stuff. I had a couple last questions for you, Anu. First of all, I think one of the problems is a lot of Americans feel powerless against an entire system and government to make changes. And if some of this resonates, if some of your ideas resonate with people, what specifically can an individual do to help change the system? Because I feel like now that your book's out there, I don't know, I'm getting the vibe from you like maybe this is turning more into, this could spark some discussions that could create some real change. I'm curious what you think, how people as individuals can get involved in that process.
Yeah, that's a hard question. And people often ask me that because I think there are a lot of people in America who would like to see these kinds of changes. And with Bernie Sanders, of course, we saw that there was a real movement there that didn't come to be or didn't get the power eventually. But still, I think the best way to try to change these things is really at the state level. Like I was saying, that there are things happening in many states. And for example, the minimum wage movement that has campaigned to raise minimum wage has been fairly successful. In many states and cities, they are raising minimum wages. So I think partly just local politics are a good way to go. And often change in America, that's how change in America happens, that states and cities start changing things and then it spreads. So that would be my advice, I think, partly getting involved in your own either politics or organizations that work towards, there are many organizations that work towards goals like public health care or public option in healthcare in the United States and so on.
Okay. And I mean, the other thing that we do control is our minds and our mindset. And you have a chapter in the book, the last chapter actually, about redefining success. So I thought that might be a good place to sort of tie things together, because it's empowering to know, hey, well, you might feel powerless against certain systems and it's so big and there's so much change. And if you're somebody that really wants it and sees the value in the Nordic way of doing things, and you want to bring some of that good stuff to the States, it can be upsetting because the change is slow, but we always have control over our minds and we can always create our own happiness in many ways. We do create our own happiness. So you talked about redefining success, and from the American perspective and the Finnish perspective together, what are your thoughts on how we should define success?
Yeah, I have a chapter on that, but of course I don't have a very definitive answer to that. But I do think for Americans, it might be, I think one thing would be to understand that, well, I think it's a good thing to pursue your own dreams and goals, but it's also okay if you're not the best in the world. You don't have to be. It doesn't mean like you're failure. And I think this is maybe counterintuitive and for Americans can seem also not very can-do spirited. But I think it's also important and good to realize that some of the troubles Americans have in life are the result of the system that makes their life very hard compared to people's lives in other countries. And so it's not always your own fault. I find that Americans also blame themselves quickly. Like, I just couldn't make it happen. Why am I always so, my finances are difficult and everybody else is making it happen. So I think in that sense, being aware that there's actually problems in the system too, and we can work towards solving those. And at the same time, you can sort of be a little bit more merciful for yourself and for your children too. I know it's hard in the United States because everybody's so afraid that if their children do not excel, then they might have really difficult lives if you don't have a good job where you make a lot of money. So it's hard to say that, just let go of that fear and relax. That's not really a solution, of course, for parents who are worried about their children. But overall, I think absolutely it's just sort of trying to think about it more in terms of it's a good thing to be a good person and have a good life, and everybody doesn't have to win the Pulitzer Prize or something.
Very cool. My last request of you is if you can get all the Nordic countries together and make them a little more chatty for me on the streets so I can
I'm working on that.
maybe engage in some of that small talk. No, it's funny because it seems like people like on a one-to-one level, they always express that they want more of that and they admire that about America. But then even though everybody feels this way, they go out and it doesn't happen. So I'm not quite sure how to... I mean, I'm willing to do my part.
You just have to keep talking to them and maybe they'll get better at it. I mean, for me, all I can say is that moving to the United States, practice makes perfect. I just had to get used to it and then I started enjoying it. So I don't know how we're going to get all Nordics to change.
Get them on board. Well, it's funny. I don't know if you experience this, but I get a lot of leeway because they know I'm American, especially if I come out and speak English. I'm learning Norwegian now, but once they realize I'm an American, then I kind of get a free pass, which is sort of fun because then the rules don't apply to me. Do you find it's the same in the States for you?
Good question. Maybe not so much. Maybe Americans are so used to that there are people from all kinds of backgrounds, so they don't give you that much like slack because of that.
Well, where do you want people to go to find you?
Do you mean find the book? Oh, you can just go online. So I have a website. My name is maybe a little bit difficult, but anupartanen.com. But if you just Google the Nordic Theory of Everything, I think my website should come up and the book comes up. So yeah, absolutely. If people are interested, they should check it out.
Yeah, definitely check it out. Again, I highly recommend it. And congratulations on the book. Thanks for putting down all these wonderful ideas in one spot. Definitely gets you thinking in a different way. And I hope you enjoyed the perspectives that Anu shared today. And thank you for taking the time to come on and share them.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Let me know if you come through Norway.
Yeah, I will.
Have a nice day.
You too.
There you go. I want to thank my guest, Anu, for stopping by and sharing her perspective. I loved her book. Pick it up if you're interested in the subject at all. Highly recommend it. Really appreciate her time. And let me know what you thought of this show. A little bit different, perhaps tangentially related to travel and a topic that's certainly hot at the moment, I would say. Universal health care or lack thereof back in the States right now. At least at the time of recording. So let me know what you thought of the show. I think it's important to talk about some of these important issues as travelers, as world citizens, as people who get out there and want to learn more about the world because we want to be connected to it. And this is a part of that, taking care of each other and learning about other cultures and what can we take from places and do better? What can we take back home and do better for our societies, for our communities, for ourselves? And this is one of the countless beautiful things about travel, how it connects us, not only to ourselves, but also to the entire world, the places that we see, the people that we meet. And even when we come home, we're still connected to those places and those people in some ways. Travel changes the world for the better. I am 1,000% convinced of this, and that's why I love doing what I do. And I want to help as many people that want to travel as possible get out there and do it. Help you fill your life with as much travel as you want. That's what it's all about. And this podcast is here for you. I make this show for you. And although I'm talking into a microphone right now and you're not in the room, I feel like you are because you're sitting here listening with me, hanging out. I truly appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed yet, if you're new to the show, please subscribe. And you can always write me an email, jason@zerototravel.com. Always love to hear from listeners. I didn't give a shout out in the beginning because I'm going to right now to one of you fine folks out there. I want to say hello to Anita. She wrote me an email. She said, Jason, I'm a 24-year-old engineer from Bozeman, Montana. I found your podcast at work and I've been listening to it for about a month. I've been dreaming about taking an international trip for a few years now and decided to make it happen with inspiration from your podcast. I requested time off work and I'm looking at tickets during every spare moment. I finally made concrete plans to go to Torres del Paine, Chile in February to backpack the circuit with my boyfriend. My biggest struggle with travel is just the confidence to jump in and make that commitment, i.e. actually buying the plane ticket. I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of your episodes and maybe getting some inspiration for another trip, plus more advice for this upcoming one. Cheers, Anita. Thank you, Anita. Congratulations. I've been to Torres del Paine. If you want some advice around trekking in Patagonia, did a whole podcast about it in the archives called Trekking in Patagonia, I believe. And if you're into trekking and hiking, we also have an entire series about trekking in Nepal. I did a trip to Nepal a couple years ago, did a 16-part podcast series about it. If you haven't heard that yet, just search trekking with 2 Ks, Trekking Nepal in iTunes or wherever you're listening to podcasts. You can find it, give it a listen. If you dig that kind of travel, I think you'll enjoy that series against a 16-episode series. And if you haven't signed up over at zerototravel.com yet, I mean, seriously, what are you waiting for? You're still hanging out, listening. Hit pause right now. Just go to the homepage. I put a sign-up form in the sidebar there so you can join the online community and get even more stuff, more good stuff to help you travel the world endlessly on your terms. Now, let me leave you with this quote. It is from Albert Schweitzer. The purpose of human life is to serve and to show compassion and the will to help others. Smile, have a wonderful day. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.
Where's your playlist taking you? Down the highway? To the mountains? Or just into daydream mode while you're stuck in traffic? With over 4,000 hotels worldwide, Best Western is there to help you make the most of your getaway, wherever that is. Because the only thing better than a great playlist is a great trip. Life's the trip. Make the most of it at Best Western. Book direct and save at bestwestern.com.